In order to solve a task like this, we need to break it down into simpler chunks. This process of breaking things down into simpler chunks is known as decomposition. So let's get started. Well, first of all, we need to make sure we can roll 2 sets of dice. Well, actually we did that last lesson. If you remember, we wrote the code which looks something like this. Dice 1 equals math.getRandomNumber, dice 2 equals math.getRandomNumber. If I run this code, you'll see it prints me out 2 dice. If I run it again, I get 2 new random numbers. So it's storing them into variables. So we did that last lesson, so we already solved part of the problem. Excellent. Well, that was easy. Then it says, count the number of times a double appears. Now, in order to decide if it's a double, we need to check to see if the 2 numbers are the same as each other. So the dice 1 is the same as dice 2. Well, that sounds very similar to a selection and a decision. If we actually think about how to decompose it, we need to roll the dice, check to see if it's double. If it is, I need to add 1 to the count. Then repeat until 1,000 dice have been rolled. Now, you don't try and solve this all at once. We do it in bit by bit. So I've already written the code for roll dice. The next bit of code I need to do is check to see if it's a double or not. Notice the keyword if. I'm checking to see if it is the same. So let's see how that would turn into code. It'll be an if statement initially. Now I'm checking to see if dice 1 is the same as dice 2. So it's simply writing down dice 1 equals dice 2. Don't forget if statements have the word then after it and also the word end if. Now at the moment, all my code's doing is checking to see if they're the same. Now that is actually this part code here, but if it is, I want to add 1 to count. Well, what is count? Count is something I'm going to use to keep track of how many times I see a double. Now in programming, when I want to keep track of something, I need to create a variable. So going back to my code, I create a variable called count, which initially will start off as 0, because I haven't seen any. Then inside the if statement, if I have seen them, if we go back to my problem, it says if it is, add 1 to count. Okay, well if it is count equals count plus 1. Okay, the reason I have to put count equals count plus 1 is because I'm adding 1 to the count and I need to store that new value back into the variable using what's known as called an assignment, and that's what the equal sign means here. So that's the this bit done, and then I've got the repeat. Now we've already seen that repeat uses a while loop. We need to use the while loop for this. Now we've already seen how a while loop is structured. We need a start value, an end condition, how it's going to get to the end, and what code it's going to repeat. Well, I need to roll 1,000 dice. So it's going to start at the value of 1 and it's going to end when it's 1,000. Now, in order to do a while loop properly, I need to create a new variable. I'm going to call it x, like we did before. I then need my while loop. So while x is less than or equal to, well, the end value was 1,000. And then I'll put my end while there. Now, we then have to decide how it's going to get from the start to end. Well, it's going to go in ones. Yeah, so I'll roll 1 dice, then another, so it's always going to increase by 1 each time. So inside my loop, I'm going to add my x equals x plus 1. Finally, I need to think about what code I'm going to repeat. Well, coming back to the original problem, we want to roll 2 dice 1,000 times and keep track. So effectively, we want to check this bit here, the roll dice, and check to see if it's a double or not. So coming back to my small basic, I've already written that code there. Okay, it's rolling a dice and checking it. So I'm going to take my rolling dice code here, and I'm going to put it inside my loop. That's the first thing it's going to do. So it didn't copy properly. There we go. Okay, and I'm just going to tidy it up so it looks presentable. I then need to do the check. So I'm going to copy that code there and place it underneath. Notice I'm putting things underneath one another. Now the reason I'm doing that is because if I did the check before I rolled the dice, well, that doesn't make sense, does it? You can't check something if you've not rolled the dice. So that's why they're underneath each other. I'm just going to remove that code at the bottom. And I'm going to remove the code at the top. The final bit of the problem says we need to print out the results at the end. Well, that we already know is just a text window, dot write line, and then in quotation marks, the result is count. So here we go. Here's the final code. Now, the final code looks quite complicated, but the steps I took to get there were actually quite simple. I broke it down into little chunks. I started off with the simple chunk first, and I built my code up over time. Okay, I did this quite quickly, so this video wasn't too long. But you could do bit by bit, test each stage, and see how it comes along. Okay, this is how you can decompose a difficult problem and make it simpler.